Hey everybody, it's Rajesh here.
Intane here.
Welcome to our podcast, Baskets of Knowledge, Chats with a Difference. In our podcast, we invite guests from around the country and around the world to talk about how they got to where they're at the moment. It's about a journey, it's about an experience, it's about their life. Kia ora koutou, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Baskets of Knowledge. Again, like I say, I have no idea what number we're on, so it's just another episode. Unfortunately, Tane can't join us today. He's not feeling well. So you just have me and you have my amazing guest. And as always, we try and go around the country and around the world to pick up and talk to people that we think are pretty fantastic with some great stories. And today's guest is no different. An amazing person who I'm sure we'll learn a lot from in today's episode. Welcome to our podcast, Natasha. Natasha, Tash, what should we call you on the podcast? What would you like us to call you?
Tash is good. Or if you really want to get close, you can call me Tish Tosh. That my father used to call me when I was little. But Tash is good. Tash is good.
I'll say Tash. I'll call you Legend. I don't know, whichever one. Tash. Tash. We'll interchange.
I've been called Goat a lot recently, but yeah, Legend is good too.
Yeah, we'll go through that as we go through the session. Tash, do you want to tell our listeners just a bit about who you are at the moment, and then we'll get into your story?
Geez. Yeah, well, kia ora e homa, ko Tash tōku ingoa. No te whenua o Papa Tuanuku aho. I'm very much a wee seed, a wee kākano in understanding who I am and where I root. So my name is Tash. I am from the earth, most simply, and on an exploration of finding out more about my connection. I was originally born in the UK, in the south of England, and I travelled here when I was a wee tamariki, moved to Waiheke Island, had a barefoot childhood there, and then I've done a lot of flying around. Tauranga, lived in Ecuador, back here, Otago University, over to Mexico, Central America, and now I'm here again in Otipoti. But I am a fierce, curious adventurer. I am a transformer. I am an intimacy instigator, and I am a rainbow. Yes, that is who I am.
Beautiful. What an amazing description of yourself. And I think there's so much there for us to delve into. And I think the first area we're going to talk about is let's talk about your upbringing in Waiheke Island as a, like you said, a barefooted Waiheke Island, which then links back to the fact that you said that you're from the earth. So has this the strong link to the earth been something that's been part of your whole life, or something that you, as you started exploring, you realized, actually, wait a minute, there's a lot more than just the material and the physical world that we see in front of us?
Super good pātai. I've always been very curious about the earth, and I remember further back from Waiheke when I was in the UK, loving the natural world. I grew up with a father who was one of the very beautiful things that gifted to us as a parent was he was very adamant that we wouldn't lose our imaginations. Our imaginations were our superpower. And so every full moon we would write to the fairies, and they lived in our garden. And every time I went to someone else's whare, their garden was what excited me the most. And I would go explore and see if I could find nooks and crannies or other things living there. And I also really loved my mum's veggie patch. Definitely moving to Waiheke was, I remember, and it's funny, I was only 8, but obviously, I don't know what I thought I was playing out, maybe a scene from a movie, but I remember landing in New Zealand and just looking around and physically pinching myself and being like, where am I? And to move then to a tiny island off of Auckland, in the Hauraki Gulf. And in the first week, we lived just up from Palm Beach. And in the first week of living there, there was a pod of dolphins in the bay. And then a couple of days later, there was 2 orca playing with, like a frisbee, a stingray. And I was, as an 8-year-old, I was just thinking, oh my gosh, where the heck have we moved? I feel that in my journey, I guess from that point onwards, as a wee person, our connection to all life is much more expansive. And I, as a lot of people and as a lot of communities and cultures, and I guess as a tract of the culture from which I'm from, we started connected, and there's a violent kind of suppressing of our own connection and other people's, and a really deep forgetting. So even in my own journey of nearly 26 years, I was very connected and felt very drawn to. And then as I kind of forgot myself, I also forgot how I was connected. And it's only really been, if I'm completely honest, only really been in the last 2 years that I've come back home to myself. And part of that journey has been remembering how connected I am to Papa Tuanuku, and feeling much more earthed, which is cool.
Yeah, and I love how you said that, because when we're growing up, every one of us has imagination. We grow up with imagination, and at some point in our life, it becomes, oh, you can't think about that kind of stuff. That's airy fairy, and it's pretty crazy how something switches where you go from, hey, anything's possible in the world, to unlimited by again, it's your mind. So at one stage, your imagination is wide and open, and the next stage, it's just the same thing that had the power to give you the thoughts, and now it's now blocking you. Do you remember the time where that started transitioning? Was it when you started going to school and you have to start conforming to, say, mainstream ideas? Was that a point, or was it just, hey, a natural progression when hey, let's just shift a little bit?
As my therapist says, when something comes to your mind, even if it seems unrelated, share it, because it's probably somehow related. I'm thinking of a memory of, I had moved to Tauranga, and I was in intermediate. I went from very small village primary school in the UK to small island primary school on Waiheke, to the biggest intermediate in the entire country as a year 7 and 8. So quite a big shift. And I remember being in year 8, and we had some kind of assignment we were doing. And I've always been a question asker. I've always been curious. And I remember that the teacher kind of gave us this assignment, but in a very, there was almost like no container kind of way, just like, do this. And I remember going up to my teacher and asking them a bunch more questions to get some clarity on what it actually was we were doing. And I remember getting quite strongly reprimanded for asking so many questions. And I remember being very confused about that memory for a long time. And it's only been recently re-sitting with it that I realized that the reason I was asking so many questions is because I had suddenly realized that I couldn't just do anything I wanted, or I couldn't take this assignment where my imagination could take it. There was these invisible set rules that I was expected to kind of just know and comply with, but I didn't know them. And so what I was asking the questions was like, what are the rules? Tell me the rules, because I know you're going to mark me on the rules. So tell me what they are, so I can do it in the way that you want me to, because I know that if I just did it of my own volition, of my own imagination, I would get reprimanded. So what I was trying to do was trying to get it right within the rules, because I'd suddenly realized as a small person that there was this kind of structure, which is really interesting. So I think I feel that from kind of that point onwards, once you realize that there's this container on your imagination, or your uniqueness, or your way of showing up in the world, is there. And then as a wee person, you want to be accepted. You want to do things quote unquote right. So you start to conform to those invisible, not so invisible rules.
Yeah, and it's crazy because it's not also just a wee person, also an adult. Lots of adults want to conform to be liked or to conform to society. And over the last few years, I've also been exploring this phrase that I read somewhere called the culturescape, and the culturescape that is defined for us for our beliefs, whatever it is. And within the culturescape, one of the key things that I read about was something called brules, BRULES. And in your word, they're basically invisible rules, which this author says they call rules or bullshit rules. These
Yes.
rules that have been created by the culturescape that we grew up in, that we just try to conform because we think this is what we have to do. For example, as a wee child, there you had to go, right, cool. You said you can do anything, but actually anything doesn't mean anything, right? There's something that, and then as we grow older, we have these rules that you study, you go to university if you wanted to, but university is a place for you to go to, and then you find a partner, and then you get married, and you build a house, and you have kids, and you buy, and this is the rules that the culturescape has given us. And when you don't do that, society goes, hey, you are not living your best life because you're not ticking these boxes here. So it's really interesting because the stuff that you say resonates really, really strongly with me as I started exploring this area. And it's quite sad because a lot of us live in this world without knowing. We just do it because we have to, or we think we have to. Sorry, we think we have to. It's awesome that as a young person, but then that goes on to how many young people in the world today are feeling that, and then their life just changes dramatically in some cases because they have to live in the space here. So you did this here, which you changed it a little bit, and that's all good. And did you go to Ecuador after Waiheke, or sorry, after Tauranga, or did you go to university first?
I did. So I finished high school in Tauranga, and then a gap year, a year off was traveling was something that I was always going to do. I was very privileged growing up that, I mean, apart from and within moving out to Aotearoa, did do a lot of exploring and had the privilege of doing travel as a young person. So had my sights set on doing a gap year, and wanted to do it with some kind of intention. And it's now, my I look back on all of the iterations of Tash, and to be fair, some of them might not even be friends. Some of them might not even like each other, which I think is fun. And within what I knew at that time, and within who I was at that time, I decided to go and volunteer overseas. So it was through a company, and I had I stayed with a family in Ecuador, and I worked in a wee school for people of all ages with disabilities, neurological or physical, and it was a school that was focused on practical skills. So apart from the very, very young tamariki, everyone else within the school either was in like the painting room or the woodwork room or the ceramic room, the bakery, and they would make these pieces of craft and then sell them to fund the continued education continue to fund the school. And then I also worked in an afternoon care center for other tamariki, and I did that for about 6 months, and then did a couple of months of travel down through Peru, Bolivia, and a bit of Chile, and then ended up back in the UK for 4 months to spend some time with family before I came back for uni.
Oh, crazy. What an awesome experience that would have been. And I'm just going to take you right back a little bit. When you were a young wee tamariki landing in New Zealand, dolphins and orcas, great. what is it like for, I guess, 17 or 18-year-old Tash to land in Ecuador? What is the impression there?
Take myself back. Um, Something that I'm very much sitting with now. I love the edge.
Yeah,
Um, I love the unknown. And I can see where I've chased that, maybe without much consciousness or intentionality previously. So for me, and I just felt like another day in my life, really. I we landed in Quito and was staying again with a host family doing 2 weeks of intensive Spanish. And big city, lots of dogs going off. And I remember a new friend at that point who I now live with and is one of my dear soul friends, and we met at the airport
oh wow.
before coming, 24 hours before. And she was staying at the same family, and she came into my room in the middle of the night, very overwhelmed, and we just sat there and we hugged and kind of washing over ourselves, what we'd done and where we were. And I feel like I said, because I'm sitting at a very similar place now, and I guess retrospectively looking back at it as that kind of dancing on the kind of cliff edge, and just curious. I guess within that space I had quite a bit of structure, so there was a program or a format that I was going to step into, but mostly just curious, mostly just what's this going to be like.
Yeah, and it's crazy because it's so different to the UK and to New Zealand. Even though they're different, they're very similar in the cultural context. And when you go to South America and you land in a place where, hey, the cultural context that you have growing up in this part of the world is thrown out the window. Just thanks for coming, see you later. And it reminds me when I came from Africa to New Zealand, I just switched my mind because I grew up in noise and bustle and sound, and it was just very busy and everyone was doing things. And I landed in Dunedin and I was like, oh, it's a little bit different. And I still remember to this day, it's been however many years, and I still remember when I landed in Dunedin, the biggest controversy at that point in time was they were building the Mitre 10, and the city was in uproar because there was going to be a bright orange building, and which is going to spoil the cityscape. And I was like, wow, where have I come? So it's pretty crazy. And like you say, in those first few days and first few moments, it sinks in, and you go, oh, where have I come? And then there's two ways to address this. You go, man, this is terrible, and turn back and head back home. Or you go, I'm just going to embrace this and see what happens, and grow from it. But it's hard at that point in time.
Definitely. I had always had, like I said, been very privileged to have parents who um valued the input and the learning from and learning with different cultures as I grew up. And we did a lot of my dad did a lot of couch surfing. So every time I went to his house, there were new people from different places traveling through and staying for one night or a week. And so my exposure, even within countries like the UK and Aotearoa, well, my exposure to other cultures and other places and people and ways of life was quite high. So I was I was very privileged in that sense, and so I guess was able to hold myself through a lot of that change differently to other people because of that experience previous.
Yeah, and I guess that helps, and also helps your soul friend at the moment, because you have someone that's actually gone through this, and those skills and those learnings that you have are just there. because they're now part of you, even though you don't realize it. You go, wait a minute, this is actually pretty cool. So you lived this amazing life and experience in Ecuador at that point in time. Then you went to the UK, and now you've done your gap year. It's time to go to university. Now, going from doing what you want to do, what is it like for you to go? Was university always on your mind, or was there something that came up as you were doing your gap year?
Definitely always on my mind. I have always I had always I guess even more so when I learned to play the rules, thrived within the mainstream academic system, of which is also a privilege, and also that kind of early recognition of these rules, and the ability to conform to them in a way that worked to my privilege. So, and I also was that my curiosity as a kid, I was able to then channel that into that kind of learning system. So I loved kind of intellectual pursuit. So university was definitely always on the cards. Otago was never always on the cards. I like to say, well, yeah, again, they bribed me to come down here, and even the high bribe was not enough initially to make me go, yes, I'm definitely going. But my mum was definitely like, yes, you're definitely going. I can't afford to send you to university without this. So I was definitely going to go to Auckland or Vic. I remember sitting in the UK having a list of like, oh, what should I choose? And then I suddenly got this email from Otago, and I was on a video call with my mom at the time, and I got an email, and it's gonna sound it does sound strange. But I remember getting the email saying, oh, congratulations, we'd love to award you this scholarship. And I was on the phone to mom. I was like, kind of fuck them. I don't want to go to their university. And mum was like, oh, like, hold your horses, what is it and how much, more importantly, how much is it for? Because money played quite a negative role in my upbringing. And I looked on the website and I was like, 45 grand. And mum was just like, so yeah, I was, and in a lot of ways there's been so many synchronicities and cosmic collisions in my life, and that was a big one. And I had other explanations for it at that point in my life. And yeah, the offer I couldn't refuse. So like you said, I'd never been to Dunedin before coming down here. So I got back from the UK. I wasn't in the best space after my gap year. I had gone away, but I didn't know who I was, and I was pretty lost and in quite a dark space. And that kind of running away from self hasn't really changed, to be fair, until like the last 2 years. So was hopeful that I'd come back to New Zealand and go to university, and the dark clouds would all kind of roll away. And they kind of do at first when you go to a different place. You catch up to yourself. But anyway, landed in Otipoti. Well, landed in a field, and I was thinking, what the fuck? This is supposed to be the fifth biggest city settlement in New Zealand, and what is going on? And yeah, I got to Dunedin and had enrolled in. I was doing law, politics, and Spanish, which is in the end what I graduated with as well. And that was a shock. I loved university, loved also the papers that I got to choose. I remember the first paper at uni was philosophy 101 paper, and I'm like, this is the kind of thinking that I came to university for, this kind of expansive, critical, creative thinking. And it was with a lecturer called Lisa Ellis, who's also the tits. She's so awesome. Would definitely recommend anyone taking papers by her at uni. And that was definitely, I mean, throughout my whole degree, there was this kind of continuous tug of war between the authentic Tash that wanted to be listened to and break out, and the conforming, or the patterns that I had created to help me survive and thrive, but that were actually really damaging me. So my whole degree was kind of this tug of war. And again, did a bit of running away from myself, and flying away with beautiful intention and much exploration to Mexico for an exchange in my 4th year. So I was away. I kind of, seemingly to everyone else in my life, kind of just pulled the middle fingers and jetted off, and spent 2 months traveling solo through Central America, and then spent 5 months at uni in Mexico City, and then a month in the middle of the Costa Rican jungle, doing a workaway with a family, and then came back to Aotearoa and finished my last year and a half of uni.
There's so much to dive into there. So you go so much there, and I like the first thing I want to touch on is when you landed in the field. That resonates exactly how I felt when I landed in Dunedin. I was like, third world country, Zimbabwe, coming to first world New Zealand, landed in Dunedin. I was like, why are there cows here? Why are there cows here? Why is the airport the size? Where have I come? What have I done? And driving 27 kilometers to get to the university. I was like, what is this? I remember calling my parents with the phone card at that time, going, I landed in the field, and they're like, "What?
I think there's
Are
been
you
a
sure?"
mistake.
Exactly, what's going on? So I resonate, and I feel that so much as when you say that. Very, very funny. So you go through this journey here where you are battling yourself, real versus authentic. Authentic is real, but the mask versus the real. When you went over to Mexico, is this when you started finding your real self a bit more, or was there still a mask in that? Actually, let's go back one step. Why did you choose Mexico? You have exchange, you can go anywhere in the world, essentially. You've already been to South America in your own experience. Is there a pull towards that part of the world and those cultures, or was there another reason, if you don't mind sharing?
Definitely a pull towards that part of the world. My dad as well has strong connections with Central and South America, and had done a lot of travel through Mexico. So potentially a way to further connect with my dad, as well as doing exploration for myself. And I also was excited to dive further into speaking Spanish. And what I didn't quite, I guess, an unintended, especially within that part of the world, unintended learnings around the indigenousness, and the indigenous knowledge, knowing, and magic and ways of being within that part of the world, which I'd had experience with, which is where my dad's connections link in. But I guess I also again, I think I confuse a lot of people in my life, especially not so much now, because I do less of the conforming, but I could switch quite quickly between conforming and rebelling, which had people kind of like in a bit of a spin. And I have always enjoyed proving the conforming wrong, by rebelling. But I got frustrated because you could see the narratives that were peddled within Pākehā European spaces about other parts of the world and the people and their value and what it's like there. And a bunch of it is controlling, fear mongering, and kind of like objectification and mechanisms for, I don't know, bolstering of self, or this non-culture culture of whiteness. And so I even in my gap year, people just, you'd see people's eyes when I said what I had done or what I was about to do. And it was the same when I said, you know, people were like, oh, cool, you're going to exchange. And they kind of expect you to say you're going to, I don't know, going to Europe or something. And I said, I'm going to Mexico City. And their first reaction was always like, oh, this dangerous. Like, you know, are you sure you want to do that as like a young white woman? And I'd turn around and be like, what do you mean by that?
Yeah.
And what information has been fed to you for you to have that narrative? And who do you think that's actually really harming? And so it was kind of this, and you can anything can happen to you anywhere. I'm not saying that I was then just like willy-nilly kind of rose tinted glasses.
Yeah.
But it was this kind of embodied show of like, kind of check yourself to the people around me, that these places and these people have ways of being and ways of life that are incredibly, like, much more nuanced than the narratives that are peddled in our spaces, in Pākehā spaces, show. And the part that our history and our whakapapa plays in a lot of those spaces is huge, in the colonial violence and mistreatment, and how that now shows up in these societies in modern day. And so it was kind of this, kind of a bit of like a, well, I'm going to show you that it's actually, that if you don't explore with curiosity and empathy and the willingness to learn from everyone and everything, then you're going to live a very sheltered and very boring life back in New Zealand. And
yeah, and I love that share, because you know, a lot of people, through no fault of their own, apart from just not doing their own exploration, being curious, quickly judge. You say you're go to Mexico, oh, dangerous. You're from Zimbabwe, oh, dangerous. Oh, I heard about, you know, the racial inequality, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, but you're just hearing one narrative. You're not hearing the actual story. You don't know what it's actually like. You know, there's people living in these countries everywhere. There's people living around the world. And if the world is really a dangerous place everywhere you go, then, you know, it'll be a whole different space. And I'm not saying some places are not dangerous. Like you said, we don't live in a rose-tinted glass world. There's some places in the world that are dangerous, but that doesn't mean that, hey, just because they're dangerous, you shouldn't go there. You're just going to have awareness when you go there. I've made a choice to come here. I'm going to be aware of that. But your judgment of that place shouldn't affect the way I do stuff. You know, and that's really hard. Right? And that's across a lot of things in life, actually. You know, people's judgment versus your actual what you do. Tash, so you have this experience in Mexico, and there's lots I want to cover. And what I want to talk about is, because I know the cool things that you do, I'd love you to share about so we're speaking about the academic side. You know, you say you're privileged to get a scholarship. Yes, you're privileged, but hey, let's go with the fact that you did the hard work. You work with the system. You were acknowledged for the hard work. The university's acknowledged that. They said, all right, cool. Come along, we're going to bribe you and come to our target. Come along, you have that experience. But while you're at university, something started becoming more and more your passion, you know. So you have your academic side, which we all go through. And one of the things I keep saying in this podcast is universities, whichever university you go to in the world, is the greatest learning happens out of the classroom, not in the classroom. And for you, what are your passion areas that started coming to the fore that you now go, hey, this is where I am. I'm a champion for this because I believe with my heart I know that there's tons here.
Mm. It definitely developed, and I think I thought about it a lot at uni, particularly in like I said, there were kind of seeds that were dropped with papers, and that first philosophy paper through to, and I did law, and there's a lot of conforming in law, and um a lot of structure and a lot of hierarchy and a lot of privilege. And even within my law degree, I chose the kind of law and papers, which everyone's like, oh, lesser law papers. I'm like, you know, and I remember doing jurisprudence. It was in my 5th year where I really jam-packed my learning with things that made me come alive. And I took jurisprudence in my last year, which is a compulsory law paper, full year law paper. And for most people, they're just like, I don't get it. I don't understand. I don't like it. And I just have to do it. But what I loved, it was my favorite law paper. And if I say that to other law students, they just look at me like I'm just the most bizarre human to walk the planet. And the thing that I loved about it is that I just spent 5 years learning how to operate within the structure. And then here was a paper that was just dismantling the whole structure. And I thought, go fucking at it. I was like, yes, do it. Like, and I loved it. It was to the extent that the system can be critical of itself. It did, and it really did make you, what it did, it offered you to think more about it. It didn't necessarily demand you be radical, but it offered this space of deconstruction and of critical thinking and creative thinking and feeling within a system that is very analytical and very like objectified, and it profits off us not being connected. And alongside that, I took another paper which was super formative, was another Lisa Ellis paper, actually, the second Lisa Ellis paper that I ever took. So she bookmarked kind of my more expansive university experience, and it was Law, Nature, and the State. And it was all about how our different connections between humans and all other beings and the planet and our societal structure shapes each other. So how we set ourselves up in a societal structure affects how we affect ourselves and the planet, and these underlying kind of narratives and ways of being that permeate through societal structures. And I loved it. And for the first time, I remember reading a paper that within the kind of the semester and the required readings probably was a kind of, I don't know if anyone, I'm not quite sure what her intention was, but it was a paper, it was a recount of someone who was in Australia and was going on a kind of canoeing expedition, and obviously lots of crocs, and one morning set out kind of on a solo canoe up some of the water systems, and she's recounting as a survivor of being attacked by a croc and what do they call it, death rolled multiple times and walking away, well, maybe not walking, but coming away from it alive and being able to recount the story. And what I found most interesting in her recount and most moving is probably a more apt word, was that she starts to recognize that before she was attacked, she was connected to a system that was telling her she was in danger. But we have so long, as humans particularly, suppressed our feeling selves to elevate our thinking selves and to give all power to our analytical minds, that she just muted this flashing red light, that, and these, not just this feeling, but there was like, she recounts seeing kind of omens in the rock as she paddled past, that everything else in her body was saying, you know, you're in danger, you need to leave or turn back, or
Yeah.
but her mind kind of just nullified, or made them seem stupid.
Yeah.
And it then wasn't, and then I left university, and I still left uni as very much, I'd done a lot of work, but I'd done a lot of work in my head.
Yeah.
So I'd made, you know, even in my own journey and my own self-healing, and even within societal issues, of which wove into myself and of which I affect as well. I had kind of outsmarted them. I just made them make sense in my head, and then said, oh, well, I've dealt with them, that it's fine. And I left university, and I left this very brain powered space. And it wasn't until beginning of last year, and it's strange because my university journey has really only continued now working here in the social impact studio, that I found the space to start actually feeling these, to feel what I was learning instead of just thinking about, and to make them real in myself. And I really feel that I'm coming in a circular way back to your question, in the sense of, my own journey has made me realize what makes me excited, and what makes my soul come alive is to be a shake shit upper in the way that moves people to embody themselves and to feel, and to feel our way through that healing, both as selves, as communities, and as like, and as larger societal structures. I heard a kind of quote the other day that expression is the only antidote to repression, and I'm sure that rings true for so many, for all people, in whether we have experiences, both the repressor and the repressee, which most of us do. And I found that whichever, and not that I have a kind of limited way in what that in the way that might manifest, but my passion, what makes me come alive, is creating spaces for people to start expressing and start feeling. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but
That totally that is a fantastic dive into the way you have gone through your journey, because I think a lot of people just think, and through no fault of theirs, that the journey is a straight line. You know, even though we know that the journey in life is not a straight line, in our minds, like we say, our logical mind goes, hey, everything should be a straight line. And I like what you said there about feeling versus the logical mind. And you know, you've probably heard this saying before, that anything only has meaning because of the meaning you give to it. And in the story you gave about the person, the crocodile, the meaning the person would have given was, hey, my logical mind saying it's safe, so I'm going to go with that. There's other stuff here, I'm not going to listen to it. And a lot of us do that there. We just give things the meaning that we want the meaning to be, or we preclude the outcome. You know, we go, I want this to happen, therefore I'm going to ignore everything else that's saying no, 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 no. And because this is the way. And it's different to other people saying no versus you saying no. And I think this is where people get caught up. A lot of people won't listen to themselves, but they'll listen to other people. And you know, I like the way you say, hey, expression is the best way to counteract repression, because that's where it starts. You know, because the repression could just be other people saying no to your dreams and your ideas, and you just say, okay, cool, I'm not going to do that. Whereas when you don't listen to yourself, your own expression, then you become your own repressor. So it's a pretty crazy way, and I love the way that you talk about that. And it goes back right to the one word that stuck out for me when you introduced yourself was you're a transformer, and that's really really powerful because the world needs disruptors and transformers. Otherwise, we're just going to keep going in the straight line because the straight lines have been drawn for us. But sometimes you need someone to say, "Hey, what about this other road here?" And you need someone to just steer people. Like I said before, we don't have rose tinted glasses. We go through these places here and we go, right, cool. What is the intention of what we're doing? And I think that's really really important. The word intention has come through quite a few times today, and I think that's really important. And a lot of us forget about intention. We do things just because, and sometimes you do things just because, but there should be some sort of intention as to why you're doing this here. And now you're in Social Impact Studio. Let's talk about that there. So you mentioned, the last 2 years has been a real transformation for you in finding yourself. Has that been linked to the Social Impact Studio work that you do, or is it just, hey, Tash has actually found who she is, and this is fed into the Social Impact Studio work that you do?
Both. Not much of life is unilateral.
Exactly.
Oh goodness, yeah. I mean, my journey in the last 2 years, I've never learned more in my entire life. And I've never been more challenged, and I've never been more scared and also more excited to be here. And some of those sometimes at the same time. It's hard to sum up, and it seems strange because I will be, in less than a month, I'll be wrapping up my time in this space, but I'm working on not leaving before I've left in all parts of my life. And yeah, it's been like I said, it's been reciprocal, both. And it didn't particularly start. I think I was very much still locked in my head when I first started. And there's been a quite an intense road of humility to really own myself and what that looks like, and how that then ripples into the work, which is when you're working in a space that is transformative within a very transactional space. Finding the edges is really important, and understanding where something ends and you begin, or where you end and something else begins, but then understanding how you kind of you always are in a kind of dance with other things or other people's edges. There's been a lot of learning. There's been a lot of kind of on a kind of community or society or systemic level, a lot of learning, but what's been really powerful is actually not just learning about that, but feeling that, not only in the people like around us that we are, like, I'm privileged and humbled to be in relationship with and learn from, but also feeling it within myself and understanding how it affects me. Because what I'm really passionate about is that particularly people who are drenched in more privilege within a patriarchal system, a system of white supremacy, we have just gotten away with objectifying and mind spacing everything to the extent that we don't understand how it affects us, or that we affect it too. So it's been a process of not only learning these things, but feeling them, and then seeing how, when you don't just talk about things, but you show up physically in a way that's different, how much more powerful that is than just espousing a bunch of fun sounding or good sounding or powerful sounding words, be it your values, the values of this space being like creativity, community, collaboration, and empathy. And it's been a real honor to see how much my own journey and my own remembering of self has enabled me to actually show up more powerfully in an embodied way in what those mean in the work that we do, and constantly learning, and yeah, it's been a wild ride. I have been very privileged as well that this space has this small glass box, colorful glass box, has been kind enough to hold Tash in all of what that has included over the last 2 years. And I mihi, and I deeply thank Sian and the teams, student teams, in this physical space for allowing me to really bring myself at each point in time to the work, which has been important. The whole like personal professional thing, I'm like, if you're not there authentically as a person, regardless of whether it's a professional space or not, the power of your work is going to be supremely diluted. Like it's so I've been able to show up personally for the work, and for myself, which yeah, I'm leaving having come home to myself and realizing a lot of the more the unique powers that I bring, but also where and how we can start unlocking that for other people, and seeing that occur for students and other people around us is really powerful. So yeah, I love this work. Weird, sad, and excited all at the same time to be wrapping up. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I as an outsider looking in, at the start I said you're a legend because I've just seen the impact that you and your team as a whole have had in the space here for young people. And I still remember when I was at university, these spaces didn't exist. There was no space for young people to express freely how they're feeling, what they were going through, in a safe space without being judged. I mean, we all have judgment in some way, but it's different when it's a story that you're telling and everyone's going, hey, wait a minute, I'm sharing the same, not the whole story, but some part of the story. And that's really awesome what you have as a team fostered there. One question for you though, you've done some amazing projects with Social Impact Studio. Is there any one project that I know you can't pick, but I'm going to make you pick your favorite child here. Is there one project that you go, hey, this sits with me as an amazing achievement, for you as a person, not just running it, but also in your own growth?
Gosh, yeah, all of them. But I will pick, because life is just a bunch of choices, and so I will choose.
Yeah.
I have to say that the one that makes me most proud, or kind of, it's, I guess, the culmination of it all, and funnily enough, the last big event that we did. So in 3D time makes sense that it's going to be the like woo. But All In was a speaker night that collided race, belonging, and well-being. And compared to, we always work on a hectic time frame in the Social Impact Studio. Everyone else's late is our perfect timing, and everything is always up in the air, and it can be quite chaotic and quite unexpected, and works well for us. And it also, often it's the timeline that students work on as well. So in previous events, things have been kind of hard slog, and it gets to the point where you're like, what are we doing? But what I've realized is that when something is really needed, the space just gets created, and all you are is kind of a channel to make it happen. So we'd just come off the back of another huge feat. Agency was an awesome event, and I have never seen the link look that sexy. Impressive. The link is not a sexy space, and it looked very cool. But agency was hard yakka to pull together, even though we knew the kaupapa was really strong and really needed. And off the back of that, we were kind of thinking, oh shit, we could give the funding money back. We were really generously funded by the Ministry of Ethnic Communities to host this event, which says a lot about the mana and what different spaces mihi the work that we do. Despite the fact that they will probably never know exactly what their money is going to buy. And it was 3 weeks before the event, I think, that the last time we kind of said to each other, we could give the money back. But it was just, it needed to happen. And all we were was the kind of the committed channels to bring it to life. The people, our guests, the people to come and share their stories just kind of all went yes, when previously we've had to tried really hard to get people to come along to other events, or it's been just complex. And this was just like, here you go. And even with, student signups, it was just, we had just under 120 students come to the event on a Tuesday night, listening to people in mostly live podcast style kōrero, share their story about, and they were all ethnic and migrant people living in Aotearoa, whether they were born here or had moved here when they were younger. They all also, many of them also homed other identities, be they within the rainbow community or otherwise, that also wove into how they experience life and how they experience well-being. And it was a space to both acknowledge to give stage and amplify these stories that are not often celebrated and validated within a mainstream well-being system that really, I think, profits off keeping us unwell. But I'll keep my political views at bay for a hot second. But also one for migrant, ethnic, former refugee, but also anyone of an identity that doesn't sit neatly within the playbook, to see these stories and to see these other ways of wellness, and to see this celebration and stage full of stories, different stories. So for them to see themselves was powerful. And then also for Pākehā students or people whose experiences do for the most part fit the playbook, or they maybe haven't even thought about whether their story fits the playbook or not, which in itself is a privilege, and they might actually find that it doesn't, which is then a hard journey to go through for themselves. But to see, to also, one, have yourself validated, and also to be curious and learn from other people's stories. And I'm like, got goosebumps. Our speakers were just, our guests were incredible. We had we had Sydney Wong, who is an Otatahi and co-chairs Qtopia, and is an out and proud queer Cantonese guy. We had Chai Ling, who does a lot within Proudly Asian Theatre, so a creative and biracial within herself, and talked a lot about the intersection, or the way that these kind of systemic narratives and societal structures show up in even our intimate relationships, and the way we who we have sex with, who we're in relationships with. And then we had TJ and Takunda, who both whakapapa back to Zimbabwe, and them sharing their stories about, oh my goodness, they talk to each other. All of the conversations just kind of roller coasted through just this, like, just so much heartfelt honesty, so much like you sat back in your chair and you're just like shit, and then you're belly laughing and you're just like being taken on this trip by real stories. And they shared their stories of racism and assimilation, and how they felt like, finding their strength within themselves and their culture, and that celebration, and also grief. And it was a deep privilege to have been a cog in a channel through which that event was brought to life, especially as a young queer Pākehā woman, and to see the diversity of the students that were at the event. And there, I don't know of any other event that's ever been hosted at uni that looked like that. And in many of those spaces, the aesthetic does matter. And I just, if you told me when I first, Dunedin is still a very white place. So for our non-Pākehā students, I can only imagine what it's like to come down here and be like, what the fuck? And so to have had the experience where I was the fish who didn't realize that the water existed when I first started uni, to then, no matter how much cultural exposure I'd had as a young person, I was still drenched in that whiteness, not even realizing that existed. To, at the end of the journey, be part of creating these spaces and feeling in myself why they matter and why they're powerful. Plus, I love hosting events because then I get like 4 new epic friends, and we went out for a cocktail at Pequena with them afterwards, and I just, like, it was so much fun, and it was so powerful, and I'm really, really proud of that. Was all within the face value kaupapa within Silverline, and it was about celebrating and giving stage to different life experiences that in which well-being can look and feels very different, and how we both challenge a system that is very white, and also make more space for those experiences. So yeah, I'd have to say that, definitely that will be a highlight for the rest of my life, I think, or a very pivotal thing for the rest of my life.
That's such a beautiful share, and the passion and the excitement and the goosebumps that you share is really quite telling. And it's also because you provided a platform for these young people to actually share their stories. And I think what we find is everyone has a story. Everyone in our life has a story. And sometimes when you go onto a platform, the platform dictates the story that you have to tell. But in this scenario, you're like, hey, this is the platform, you tell the story, and we will listen. And I think that's the best way. I mean, fantastic. That's amazing. And I hope that model gets extended to other spaces as well. You said it's the first time at a university. Maybe it gets extended to other spaces, because it's not just about a university experience. I also love your reference to David Foster Wallace's Fish in the Water. Fantastic. Beautiful. Brilliant. I guess if we can keep talking, but we've been speaking for almost 1 hour 15 minutes, and we both got to go to work, I think. But I have learned so much today, and there's so much in your story and your narrative that we could deep dive in, tons and tons and tons. But what I would like to ask you is, this is a question that we don't tell our guests before, because we like to put them on the spot. Our podcast, as you know, is Baskets of Knowledge. And every week we ask our guests if they could provide one piece of knowledge that our listeners could put into their basket of knowledge. What would that be? What would your piece of knowledge be?
I had a beautiful piece of mātauranga shared with me a couple of days ago, and it was about the real puku to the meaning of whakarongo, which, rongo is to hear and whakarongo is to listen, the kind of active version. And the black and white translation in English, we've kind of violently narrowed that to just your ears and just your ability to hear. But whakarongo really means to tune in with all of your senses. And I feel it beautifully kind of weaves together parts of my story, my experience, and what we've talked about. My tidbit to put in someone's kete is to really whakarongo. Firstly to yourself, to whakarongo, to tune into yourself. And when you do that, you start tuning into everything else. And then to find small ways to begin to express that, to start to not only feel it, but allow it to come out. And I do recognize that you do have to consider what places are safe for you to do that when you start that journey. But whakarongo, tune in with all your senses, and find people and places where you can start expressing that, and unlocking parts of yourself that have been repressed for a long time, and do that with kindness, and do that with love and curiosity. Yep.
Beautiful. Whakarongo. What a great way to wrap the podcast, because I think, all your stories you shared today is there's been a misalignment in humanity with whakarongo. We're not tuning into ourselves, we're tuning into other things, but we're only hearing what we want to hear, we see what we want to see. So that is a fantastic thing that I'm going to bring to my kete as well. So thank you for sharing that. Tash, legend, the GOAT, fantastic. Thank you so much for being on our podcast today. Like I said before, our listeners, I'm sure, will learn a lot. I've learned a lot. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for your time, and I appreciate you. To everyone out there, hopefully you've picked up something today. If you haven't, then why not? Listen to the podcast again. You'll find something. As always, feel free to like, share, comments with our podcast. Till next time, ka kite, and take care, everybody.
Thank you for listening to Baskets of Knowledge.
Yeah, we hope that you found something useful to put into your baskets of knowledge. And as we said before, remember to put something little into your baskets of knowledge every week. And as always, feel free to like, comment, and share this podcast. Thanks, everybody. Bye.